the battle between DeWanna Bonner, Alyssa Thomas versus Asia Wilson. Question. Are we talking about 3 of the 4 most unlikable athletes that this league has to offer? Question mark? In one damn finals?
The WNBA's biggest night became its most humiliating disaster. As MVP Aja Wilson took the court for the finals, she wasn't met with the roar of a sold-out crowd, but with the chilling sight of thousands of empty seats, a vast ocean of muted plastic where a tsunami of adoration should have been. Her face, usually a mask of competitive steel, was a canvas of pure, unadulterated rage. But her anger wasn't just about the game unfolding before her. It was a visceral reaction to the ghost haunting the arena, the one player whose absence exposed a shocking systemic truth the league could no longer hide. This wasn't a championship celebration, it was a public reckoning, a moment where the cavernous silence of the stands screamed a verdict louder than any buzzer beater ever could, revealing a deep seismic fracture in the league's very foundation.
Well, I got some bad news. Number one, I don't think none of y'all are doing any pre-WNBA prep. I don't think none of y'all are fired up for no games. None of that. In fact, I believe y'all don't care. I think y'all care about the drama around it. I do believe that, but I don't think you care about the events itself.
The atmosphere inside the championship arena was profoundly and unnervingly wrong. Instead of the chaotic, joyful cacophony of a title fight, there was a sterile, almost funereal calm. The squeak of high-top sneakers on the polished hardwood floor, a sound usually lost in the din, echoed with an unnatural and haunting clarity. The league's pre-packaged arena music, blasting from the speakers, felt hollow and painfully desperate, a transparent and failing attempt to artificially inseminate energy into a vacuum. Entire upper decks were completely desolate, forming a vast dark backdrop of gray and blue plastic that seemed to absorb the bright stadium lights into a depressing void. Television producers were clearly in a state of controlled panic, employing every visual trick in their arsenal to disguise the abysmal attendance. Cameras remained claustrophobically tight on the players' faces and the immediate action, making any wide shot of the court a fleeting blink-and-you'll-miss-it affair. The entire spectacle felt less like a major nationally televised sporting event and more like a private, sparsely attended dress rehearsal that had been accidentally broadcast to the world.
Judging by ticket prices, neither does anybody else. Wow. If ever there was proof that the Caitlin Clark fans / Fever fans are now the overwhelming majority of the fandom, look at ticket prices for finals games.
At the very epicenter of this hollowed-out spectacle was Aja Wilson, a titan of her sport, whose expression rapidly shifted from intense focus to undisguised disgust. This was supposed to be her coronation, the triumphant apex of another season of utter dominance. Instead, she was being forced to perform her craft in a sterile vacuum, an artist without an audience. Her mounting frustration became a far more compelling subplot than the game itself. When she wasn't on the court, she was a magnetic portrait of contained fury, jawing with teammates with an aggressive edge, slamming a Gatorade towel into a chair with a percussive force that registered even on the broadcast, and casting long, resentful glances toward the vacant sections as if they had personally offended her. This wasn't a momentary lapse of professional composure, it was the visible culmination of a season spent fighting for recognition in a frustrating shadow. Her anger seemed aimed at everyone and everything, the fans who didn't show up, the league that couldn't persuade them to, and most of all, the unsettling new reality that her own monumental championship-level talent was no longer the main event.
Holy hell, there's $35 seats right there. Right there. Plenty of good seats available. $46, $42.
The invisible force dictating the night's funereal energy was a rookie who was likely watching from her living room couch hundreds of miles away, her presence defined by her profound absence. Caitlin Clark had been more than just a player in her debut season. She had become a full-blown cultural event, a phenomenon that transcended sports. Her mere presence had single-handedly rewritten the league's financial future, forcing teams to relocate games to massive NBA arenas just to satisfy the unprecedented ticket demand and driving television viewership to historic, previously unthinkable heights. She was a walking, talking human narrative, a revolutionary talent who played the game with a thrilling, telegenic blend of supreme arrogance and breathtaking artistry. The Clark effect was a tidal wave of mainstream interest, and the WNBA had spent the entire year gleefully surfing it. Now, with her season over, the wave had crashed violently back into the ocean, leaving the league completely stranded on a desolate shore with its premier event, the Championship Series, feeling like a forgotten afterthought.
This should scare the league to death. With DeWanna Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, and the Mercury in the finals against Asia Wilson and the Aces, will you be locked in watching this series? ? Yes or no? Hit the poll. 4% of brave souls said yes. 96% said hail to the no.
While the cavernous arena was a sanctuary of near-total silence, the digital world was an absolute inferno of merciless ridicule. The moment the first shaky cell phone images of the empty stands hit social media platforms, the judgment from the public was swift, mercilessly creative, and utterly viral. Memes spread like a digital plague. A picture of the sparse crowd was captioned, "The WNBA Finals brought to you by the Witness Protection Program." Viral TikToks, garnering millions of views, set slow, panning shots of the vacant seats to sad, mournful music, like a nature documentary about an extinct species. The comment sections were a digital wasteland of biting sarcasm and genuine, palpable disappointment. "I've seen more people at my nephew's middle school scrimmage," one highly liked comment read. Another user added, "This is the predictable result when the league's established players spend an entire season physically targeting the one person who brought all the new fans." The internet wasn't just laughing at the league, it was actively and gleefully dissecting its failure in real time, seizing control of the narrative.
Guys, if the Fever and Caitlin Clark was playing in a finals game, let's say against the Mercury, with all that drama around there, would there be a single ticket less than $300? Now, I mean, honestly, a single ticket less than $300. I don't think so. I think you'd have courtside seats go for $5,000.
Nothing exposed the true depth of the public relations crisis more than the catastrophic and utter collapse of the ticket market. In the modern sports economy, the secondary market is the ultimate, unflinching truth teller of public demand, a real-time graph of a product's desirability. While the league tried to maintain a brave corporate face, ticket resellers on sites like StubHub and SeatGeek were practically giving seats away. Prices were slashed to incomprehensible single digits, $6 in some widely reported cases, a price that didn't even cover the associated fees. To put that into its proper humiliating context, it was less than the cost of a single beer or a pretzel at the concession stand. This financial freefall was a devastating public indictment. The WNBA's premier event, its crown jewel showcase, had generated less consumer excitement than a weeknight movie showing. It was a humiliating spectacle that turned the league's championship into a discount bin affair for the entire world to see.
You are not invested, you are not interested in watching this BS transpire on your television sets.
The disastrously low turnout wasn't a fluke or a simple stroke of bad luck. It was the entirely predictable and logical outcome of a flawed, arrogant, and fundamentally naive strategy. The WNBA's front office had gambled big, operating under the dangerous assumption that the massive, unprecedented audience drawn in by the gravitational pull of Caitlin Clark would simply stick around for the playoffs out of a newfound, generalized love for the sport. They profoundly failed to understand the nature of modern personality-driven fandom. They had not successfully cultivated millions of new fans of the league. They had simply been the temporary beneficiaries of millions of dedicated fans of a single player. They didn't use Clark's immense blinding spotlight to thoughtfully build up other stars, create compelling new rivalries, and weave engaging storylines. They simply rode the wave, and when the ride was over, they were left holding a product that this crucial new audience had absolutely no emotional investment in. It was a catastrophic failure of marketing, foresight, and understanding the modern consumer.
If Caitlin Clark was playing, if she was in these finals along with the Fever, now you know why we conveniently did not hear anything about the ankle, blah, 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 and I won't be coming back until the season was basically over. The WNBA was very aware of what that was going to do to ticket prices, etc.
The bitter seeds of this championship failure were sown months earlier in the fertile ground of a season-long narrative of hostility. From the moment Caitlin Clark was drafted, a storyline of veteran resentment began to simmer, fanned by both social media and traditional sports talk shows. It was fueled by on-court aggression that often felt like it crossed the line from tough defense to targeted intimidation, and by a steady dripping faucet of passive-aggressive comments in post-game interviews that were dissected online. This perceived jealousy, whether entirely fair or not, was a narrative poison. For the millions of new fans tuning into the WNBA for the very first time, it framed the league's established stars not as icons to be admired and respected, but as bitter, unwelcoming gatekeepers. This toxic dynamic made it nearly impossible for those new fans to transfer their allegiance, creating an invisible but impenetrable wall between the league's celebrated past and its potentially glorious future.
I can't wait to see the ratings for this. Because I did, by the way, I did see where that semifinals game against the Aces and the Fever drew like 1.8 million viewers, I think, is what it was. Will they get half of that for this finals? Will they get half of the viewership for this final?
Beneath a Jay Wilson's righteous and understandable anger, a more complex and deeply human emotion was on full display for the world to analyze the profound insecurity of a reigning monarch watching her throne, and indeed her entire kingdom, become irrelevant overnight. A champion's entire identity is built on being the undisputed center of their universe, the main attraction, the reason people buy the ticket. Wilson was still an undeniable and dominant force on the court, a generational talent by any measure. But off the court, in the ruthless attention economy of modern sports, she had been completely and totally eclipsed. She was discovering the harsh, unforgiving truth of 21st century fame. On-court dominance is respected, but cultural relevance is what sells tickets, drives conversations, and builds empires. For the first time in her professional life, Jay Wilson was a secondary character in her own league's story, and the psychological strain of that sudden demotion was etched into every frustrated frown and exasperated gesture. Beyond all the intricate off-court drama and power dynamics, many viewers pointed to a more fundamental and perhaps more damning problem. The finals matchup was simply not compelling entertainment for the new thrill-seeking audience. The games were often gritty, physical, defense-oriented struggles, a half-court grind defined by bruising post-play and methodical possessions. This style is deeply appreciated by basketball purists, but is jarringly slow and unappealing for a generation of fans who had been conditioned by Clark's high-octane, three-point-heavy spectacles. It was a classic and disastrous case of product-market mismatch. The league was serving a slow burn, critically acclaimed prestige drama to an audience that had shown up expecting a summer blockbuster filled with explosions. The result was a collective, national yawn, as millions of casual viewers quickly changed the channel in search of the dopamine hit of excitement they had come to expect from the WNBA. When the official television ratings were finally released a few days later, they confirmed the damning visual evidence in the most brutal and undeniable way imaginable. The viewership for the WNBA Finals represented a catastrophic plunge from the massive numbers seen in the semifinals, which had prominently featured Caitlin Clark and her team. It wasn't a minor, acceptable dip. It was as if more than half the audience had simply evaporated from one round of the playoffs to the next. These weren't just bad numbers, they were a smoking gun, a prosecutor's irrefutable Exhibit A. They provided undeniable quantitative proof that the WNBA's recent celebrated boom was almost entirely tethered to a single 22-year-old player. For the league's executives trying to negotiate future media deals, and for their current broadcast partners, that data point must have been nothing short of terrifying. The television broadcast of the game was a fascinating and awkward masterclass in corporate avoidance. The announcers, clearly aware of the disastrous optics unfolding around them, performed impressive verbal gymnastics to keep from mentioning the thousands upon thousands of empty seats. They talked endlessly about the passionate, dedicated fans who made the trip here tonight, while the broadcast director carefully ensured the cameras never showed that the trip was apparently made by a very small number of people. They overcompensated with a forced, almost manic enthusiasm, trying to inject a level of hype and excitement that the silent, cavernous arena simply could not provide. The entire production felt like a fragile, transparent illusion, a desperate and failing attempt to convince the viewers at home not to believe the clear evidence of their own eyes. It was a broadcast built on whispers, trying to shout over a reality of silence. What was unfolding on this embarrassing night was far more significant than a single poorly attended basketball game. It was the public manifestation of a deep-seated power struggle for the very soul and future direction of the WNBA. This was the old guard versus the new wave, a traditional hierarchical team-first ethos versus a modern populist star-driven media machine. A'ja Wilson, with her multiple championships and MVP awards, represented the league's established respected order. Caitlin Clark, with her record-breaking ratings and social media dominance, represented a disruptive, revolutionary, and perhaps uncontrollable force. The empty seats were the silent battlefield, a stark and undeniable symbol of the established order's shocking inability to hold the vast new territory that the insurgent force had so effortlessly conquered. Every great championship needs a great, compelling story, and the league and its broadcast partners desperately tried to manufacture one for this particular matchup. But authentic rivalries cannot be fabricated in a marketing meeting. They must be forged organically in the fires of genuine animosity, contrasting styles, and high stakes that feel deeply personal to the audience. For the casual, newly arrived viewer, this final series had absolutely no emotional hook. It was a technically impressive but largely soulless affair between two teams they had little connection to. It stood in stark, glaring contrast to the organic rivalries that had swirled around Caitlin Clark all season, which were filled with the kind of authentic drama, personal history, and trash talk that captures the public's imagination. The league was offering a competition, but the new audience had emphatically shown that what it truly wanted was a saga. This nationally televised event was more than just a momentary embarrassment. It was an existential five-alarm fire for the league. The long-term implications were staggering and deeply troubling. How could the WNBA's commissioner approach the critical negotiations for its next billion-dollar media rights deal when its championship game failed to generate significant public interest? How could the league's sales team attract major new corporate sponsors when its premier event looked like a ghost town on national television? The finals fiasco exposed the league's foundation as dangerously fragile and unstable, revealing that its recent celebrated growth was built almost entirely on the popularity of a single person, not on the strength of the overall brand. It was a moment that undoubtedly triggered a series of emergency meetings at the highest, most powerful levels of the sport. For A'ja Wilson, a player who had done everything right in her career, the night was a potential and unfair turning point for her entire legacy. History defines its greatest champions not just by their victories, but by their legendary rivals. But Wilson was now at serious risk of being defined not by a worthy adversary she battled on the court for years, but by the phantom whose cultural popularity she could not escape. The immense pressure on her shifted overnight, and the metrics for her success were rewritten. It was no longer enough for her to simply win more titles and rack up more awards. She was now tasked with the monumental, perhaps impossible, challenge of winning over a fickle public that had already anointed a new queen, forcing her to fight a battle for relevance that no amount of on-court skill could ever guarantee she would win. While all eyes were justifiably on A'ja Wilson's visible frustration, she was not the only star left stranded on the lonely island of irrelevance. Players like the legendary DeWanna Bonner and the toughest nails Alyssa Thomas, elite veterans with long and decorated careers, were also competing for a championship. They had dedicated the better part of their adult lives to the league, grinding through countless seasons with little mainstream fanfare, dreaming of a moment just like this. Yet in their biggest and most deserved spotlight, they were rendered practically invisible. First, their incredible accomplishments were completely overshadowed by the media's singular season-long obsession with a rookie. Then they were forced to play the most important games of their lives in a cavernous, empty arena because that same rookie was gone. They were the unfortunate collateral damage in a media war they never asked to be a part of, their championship aspirations cruelly reduced to a minor footnote in a larger, more dramatic story about fame, fandom, and a generational shift. The deafening silence in the arena was surely matched by the frantic sound of ringing alarm bells in corporate boardrooms and executive suites across the country. Major sponsors and broadcast partners like ESPN and Amazon don't invest hundreds of millions of dollars based on hope or goodwill. They invest based on cold, hard data, predictable metrics, and a clear return on their investment. The data that emerged from the finals was an unmitigated 5-alarm financial disaster. It presented them with a terrifying new variable that complicates any future negotiation. The WNBA's market value was now demonstrably Clark dependent. This single point of failure, known in the business world as key person risk, is a nightmare scenario for any investor. The private conversations behind closed doors must have shifted dramatically from optimistic projections to damage control. Hard questions about the league's stability, its leadership's vision, and the true non-inflated value of its next media deal were suddenly and urgently on the table, casting a long, dark shadow over the league's once bright financial future. The thousands of empty seats also told a fascinating story about a fundamental, perhaps permanent, shift in what modern sports fans want to watch. The WNBA Finals featured a gritty, physical, defense-oriented style of basketball, a methodical half-court grind that is deeply respected by purists and basketball traditionalists. But the new audience, the millions brought in by the Clark phenomenon, was hooked on a completely different and far more chaotic product. They craved the constant stimulation and shareable spectacle of logo three-pointers, dazzling no-look passes, and high-scoring back-and-forth shootouts. It was a clash of basketball philosophies, the tough, methodical game of the veterans versus the electrifying, almost anarchic style of the new generation. The empty finals confirmed, in the starkest terms possible, that the massive new audience had absolutely no appetite for the old way of doing things. The league was trying to sell a product that its most valuable new customers simply did not want to buy. One of the most telling and revealing aspects of the entire fiasco was how the mainstream sports media apparatus handled it. Or rather, how they conspicuously didn't. After a full season of breathless, round-the-clock, 24/7's coverage of all things Caitlin Clark, the biggest sports talk shows on platforms like ESPN and Fox Sports were suddenly and awkwardly quiet about the WNBA. The glaringly empty seats and the cratering television ratings were the enormous elephant in the room that the most prominent hosts seemed hesitant to even acknowledge, let alone analyze. This journalistic and editorial silence was a powerful story in itself. It suggested that the WNBA, without its singular, transcendent star, was no longer considered a major national story worthy of their airtime. The league had lost its precarious grip on the news cycle, and the media's sudden, collective indifference was perhaps a more damning indictment than all the social media mockery combined. What this all amounted to was the messy, public eruption of the WNBA's unspoken and perhaps unresolved civil war. This conflict was never just about a single talented rookie, it was a battle for the very soul and identity of the league itself. On one side were the veterans, the traditionalists, and the purists who believed in hierarchy, paying your dues, and a disciplined team-first ethos. On the other side was a new, disruptive, and wildly popular force embodied by Clark that represented a populist, star-driven, and entertainment-focused future. The veterans fought for what they saw as respect for the game they had painstakingly built. The new wave and its millions of fans demanded non-stop entertainment and a revolutionary shift in style. The empty finals was the catastrophic result of this internal war, a battle where in the end both sides lost. The veterans got their Clarkless championship, but they were left with no one to watch them celebrate it. The league was torn violently between its past and its future, and found itself stuck in a desolate, silent, and deeply uncertain present. Ultimately, the championship will be remembered not for the team that lifted the trophy, but for the deafening, haunting silence that surrounded their victory. It was a stark, unforgettable lesson in the brutal dynamics of modern fame and the power of a singular narrative. One player's absence had created a vacuum of interest so immense that the league's entire roster of all-stars, MVPs, and future Hall of Famers could not begin to fill it. The empty seats were not just a sign of fan indifference, they were an echo of a revolution that had already happened. A new power had arrived in the WNBA, and the league's desperate Hollow Championship was the first undeniable sign that the old world was crumbling, whether it was ready to admit it or not.